What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we return with Anne of Upon Wings. Great to be able to talk with you again, and this time in video as well.
I know. Well, thank you for having me back. I really had fun last time, so
Yeah, it was a great time last time, and I can't believe it's been over a year. Time certainly does fly.
it's crazy.
Yeah, I know, right? But it's so awesome to have you here. The last time I spoke to you, there was only like a few singles out. There wasn't that much to hear from Upon Wings yet, but now we got the Last Love EP coming out. It's kind of like a similar question that I started off with last time, but is this EP meant to signify kind of the direction that Upon Wings is going to go into in the future for maybe like a full length album, or is there a lot more experimentation that's going to be done in the future?
I think that you're right that it is kind of a signal of what's to come for Upon Wings because the thing about this EP is that every track is a little different. So I feel like on our debut EP, Afterlife, it was a lot of like songs that sounded like very similar thematically, at least, if not musically. And now when you look at the different songs on this EP, every track is a little different. And so I feel like that's what we're going to do going forward because there's even one track that's a little more poppy and then something, very, very heavy metal. So I feel like going forward, I really like kind of experimenting with different sounds. And I feel like that's kind of the direction we're headed.
Was that like a preconceived idea to move in multiple directions? Was that like intentional, or did it kind of just happen that way with the making of this EP?
Yeah, it totally just happened. I mean, I think I went into it just like, okay, I love making heavy music and with heavy guitars. So I always go to Kevin, who's our producer and guitarist. I'm like, heavy guitars. But it just happened that, I was inspired to do kind of a different kind of song with Scars, which is kind of the more poppy song. And then Last Love turned out more like hard rock. And then Eternal Way turned out more heavy metal. So it just kind of evolved that way very naturally.
Is it almost kind of does that kind of like add a little bit to the concept? Like it gets heavier as it goes along. Like maybe if there was a fourth song, it would be practically black metal.
Oh, I like that. I've always wanted to do like a screamy Upon Wing song. I don't know if I could pull it off, but a black metal, that'd be great. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so The Dream is kind of like the last track, which is it's a 10-year anniversary version of our first single, The Dream, which dropped 10 years ago. And that's not very heavy. So I don't think we went into the black metal direction for the fourth track in the EP. But you never know what Upon Wings will do.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of Upon Wings because I definitely wasn't expecting these songs to take the direction that they did after the Afterlife EP that we talked about last year. So I think it is it fair to say just rolling the dice is almost one of the main parts of the songwriting process.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like when I write the lyrics, sometimes it just different kind of like musical backings go with those lyrics. So I think that has something to do with it too, if that makes sense.
100%. Do you almost feel like different sounds or different means of self expressions or different reflections of different emotions? Do you almost feel like you portray a different side of yourself depending on the level of heaviness that the song is in?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think that definitely like, every song and the musical direction of those songs like reflects a different emotion and what, we're trying to convey with the music in general. So, yeah.
When you're working on a song for like a long period of time in a way, do you feel like it's do you almost have to kind of like maintain that emotion, like you have to kind of feel the same way when you finish a song as you did when you started, or is there really like no control over that?
That's a good question. I don't think that there is control because sometimes I'll write a song because I'm inspired in that moment about something that I'm going through. And then by the time we get to record it, maybe I'm not really going through that anymore, but I can still draw from that experience, and remember it kind of like method acting, quote unquote, and go back to how I was feeling at the time. But I think it's probably impossible to like freeze that moment in time and just have it not change by the time I record something I've been working on.
Yeah, and I'd imagine too, because I was just doing an interview with a Threshold before you, and we were having a discussion like in the mixing process. The whole point of the mixing process is to correct mistakes, so you're intentionally listening for mistakes. So I'd imagine that the idea changes from when you're writing it to when you're tracking it and recording it to when you're mixing it too, right?
It does. Yeah, I know it really does. And I'm so like with the mixing phase, I'm way too hands-on. I'm sure that all the mixers that I've worked with will be like, "Oh my gosh, Anne is like hard to work with because I'm so like into the mix." I feel like the mix is such a crucial part of the song. You want that perfect blend of instruments and vocals, and especially when it's a heavier track with guitars. I feel like it's kind of hard because you want the vocals to be heard, but you want the guitars to definitely like drive the track.
It's almost kind of like a damned if you do and damned if you don't as well, because people could criticize the vocals for being too in your face or too in the background, the guitars being too loud or the guitars being too soft. So it has to be almost like a gut instinct sort of
100%. Yep.
process, right? Um, when it comes to the meaning of the EP as well, the term "last love," I know it is kind of like cliche to ask, what is the meaning of this name? But with the term "last love," is this meant to be a metaphor? Have sort of like a metaphorical meaning? Is it meant to signify something that was a personal experience, or is "last love" meant to kind of be more open to interpretation?
No, that's a really good question. So Last Love, the song, and then like, the title of the EP, it's basically about that feeling like when you get out of a romantic relationship. I think it's pretty common to feel like that was your last chance at true love. And so that's kind of like what the whole track was written around. It was the idea that like, you're fresh out of a breakup and you just feel like I'm never going to find true love. Maybe that was my last chance for it. But in the end, I always like to have Upon Wings tracks to have some hope. So in the end, it's like, no, everyone has a chance to find love again. I definitely believe that. So that's pretty much the theme behind it.
It almost because metal has often been criticized for having no hope within it, but it almost seems like is that the intention of Upon Wings to almost kind of like have hope within your track.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, it even, the band name, I think, even signifies that. It's one reason I picked the band name, back in the day, because it's the idea that when times are rough, it's like you're maybe too weak to like walk yourself, but you're like flying on something, you're upon wings, something stronger that can take you through like the hard times.
And that could almost signify anything between a friend or a relative who could help you to a spiritual connection as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it came from like a spiritual thing, but I think that for everyone to make it their own is beautiful, so whatever it means to anyone.
Yeah, and could someone else's interpretation of it maybe change your perspective on how you look at either a title such as Last Love or The Name Upon Wings?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, probably. I don't know. I remember I know I read like Aaron Lewis, like he never likes to tell people what his songs are written about because he wants it to be open to everyone's interpretation, which I think is cool, but I kind of go ahead and just tell people because I want people to know like what I was thinking when I wrote it. But I think like hearing different people's interpretation could definitely make me see it very different ways.
Yeah, 100%. And being that, Upon Wings is now 10 years old, how has the songwriting process changed? Have you always stuck with a similar methodology, or as you learned more and more and more, you developed new tricks and twists within your voice, within your songwriting, and so on?
It's really changed. So early on, like the first song, The Dream, I just wrote alone in my bedroom, and I'm a bassist. I don't play like guitar or piano. So I just kind of did it without even any instruments, just the melodies. And then I went to Glenn Brown in Lansing, who's a great producer who masters most of our stuff. And he did the backing, the musical backing, and stuff like that. And also with Afterlife, the single, I worked with Brett Hessla down in well, we were in Chicago. He was based in Florida at the time. He's in Nashville now. But anyway, so it was like kind of a joint writing thing. But now, especially with the pandemic, it became like, I would do the vocals in my own place, and then like Kevin would do all the guitars and stuff like that in Canada where he is. So it has changed. And working with Kevin, because I don't really get over there to Canada, we do like work together, but it's also separate because I'll record here and he'll record there, like a lot of bands do now.
Yeah. I know it is kind of like a what if question, but if you and Kevin were to get into a room and cultivate a song together, without that sort of distance, do you almost feel like that the sound could be altered completely or maybe even have a completely different meaning behind that as well?
Oh wow, I don't know. I feel like if we did do that, I would probably, my guess is that my vocals would be a bit more forceful because right now I just do it on my own. But I feel like if I worked with, based on like working with other producers and based on the fact Kevin, I mean, he's in the band Slaves on Dope, he's got a great like heavy sound. He can play anything though. He can play soft stuff too. But I'm sure that he would like get a tougher, delivery out of me.
Well, and you mentioned also starting off as a bassist as well, which I think is really unique to go from the bassist to the vocals because, I feel like bass has an emphasis on a lot of rhythm and melody, whereas the vocals really, I would say, especially in Upon Wings case, has more of an emphasis on melody as well. But has anything that you learned as being a bassist been transferred into you as a vocalist?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think like you mentioned, for Upon Wings, especially like the vocals are very, very melodic. They're not very rhythmic. But I think that having kind of that sense of rhythm and groove from the bass, I hope that it helps me with my singing in Upon Wings. And it's funny because I was always a singer from when I was really little, but I really picked up bass because I loved rock music so much and I really wanted to be in a band. And I just didn't think I had the kind of voice that could do it because it was so operatic. And that's really, I tried out all the instruments and I was like, I love bass. And I still like, I just love that low end, when you lock in with the drums, like that rhythmic feeling and kind of being in the background of a band, I like too. But I ended up, after hearing bands like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and some of the female-led bands out of Europe that had more of an operatic vocal with a heavy backing. And that's why I was like, oh, maybe I should try singing instead of just, bass playing. And that's kind of how it happened.
Well, they always say that an instrument is an extension of oneself in a way. Do you feel that having a bass in your hand was a different means of self-expression than having a microphone in your hand?
Oh, for sure. I feel like with a mic in my hand, I have to just be me. I just can't be anything else, like singing in Upon Wings. But as a bassist, I felt like I could be anything. Like I could be a heavy metal bassist. I could be like an R&B bassist. I could kind of like shape myself into what the band needed, and I could also kind of be in the background, which I kind of like because I'm a more reserved person. So, but yeah, I definitely think so.
Yeah, but you would have to bear the brunt of every terrible bass player joke that I'd imagine every bass player has to deal with, right?
Oh my gosh, I know. Yeah, bass player jokes are just yeah, they're hilarious.
They're hilarious. Some of them are so cruel, but you know what? Like, the
For sure.
whenever I've interviewed my fair share of bass players, and I've told them off the record plenty of times, I'm so sorry for all the jokes you have to deal with. They're just like,
I know. I feel like the bass is a very much an unsung hero of the band.
it's one of the most important parts of the band. There are certain bands that could go without instruments. You could have bands without a guitar player. You could have bands without a singer. There are plenty of bands without drummers. But you need that low end tone, and because bass has both an emphasis on rhythm and melody, it's more needed. It is the most taken for granted aspect of rock and roll.
Thank you. I agree, Alex.
Thank you.
Totally.
Yeah, and people want to make fun of bass. Just remember Lemmy and Peter Steele and Sting. Those are the only three names I need to mention to that
Yep,
contradict
yep.
that. But can you
It's
see?
funny how many people don't even know Sting was a bass player. I mean, I don't blame them. He's known for his music and everything, but still.
Sting is not only a bass player, but I think he's one of the greatest bass players of all time.
Yep, 100%.
But can you see yourself maybe playing bass for Upon Wings as well, like maybe laying down? There's plenty of rooms for creativity in that. Can you maybe see yourself, dusting off the old instrument to maybe bring in some new ideas to Upon Wings?
I would love that. I really would. I don't know though. I mean, I'm pretty sure I couldn't play and sing at the same time. It's very hard. I've tried that. And Kevin does such a good job with the bass. I don't know, maybe. But if anything, I would almost rather be a bassist in a different band and tour, as a bassist, play live because I really like playing live as a bassist. Yeah, that would be something. My second band.
Maybe future side project. I predicted it here. Now, with the diversity in sound on this last Love EP, as we talked about before, from something more poppy to something more heavy, I think it goes without saying that there's a lot of musical inspirations that go into Upon Wings. Do you have like a different reference or a different inspiration depending on, for lack of better words, the level of heaviness within the song?
Not really. It's funny. I mean, I tend to listen to just music that I love, and a lot of it hasn't changed that much over the years. There are new bands I find, there are new songs I find that I like, but it's not even necessarily stuff that sounds like Upon Wings. Like I'm a big fan of Maynard James Keenan and Tool, A Perfect Circle, that stuff. I don't know if anyone would be able to tell, probably not from hearing our music. But like, classic metal, of course, like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden. I really like Mastodon, which is, obviously not quite classic, but And
Disappointed.
then a lot of like modern, maybe they are now, right? A
Crack the
little bit.
Sky
They're
is the
getting there.
greatest concept album of all time, in my opinion. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And also kind of like the more like active rock bands like Disturbed, Shine Down, bands like that, the post grunge kind of bands. I mean, I like pretty much any rock and metal. I like the grunge, I like hair metal. And I don't really write a song thinking like, oh, it's going to be influenced by this certain band or whatnot. I just kind of listen to everything and then I write my music and I hope that I like how it sounds. I just never really, I don't think it ever really sounds exactly like something else.
and do you think that maybe the music itself could evolve over time as you evolve as an artist too? Like, could a track like Afterlife, for example, develop new meaning and new context as the track gets older in a way? Or do you prefer if every song and every EP or everything that Upon Wings does maybe represents just a snapshot of who you are at that particular time?
Probably the latter more. It would be hard for me to hear Afterlife and relate it to anything but what it was written about. I can definitely see where some people probably have that experience with their music where they wrote it and then it takes on a different meaning as time goes on. I can see that happening. But right now, I don't know. I mean, at least for me, in the past 9 years since we've released Afterlife, it hasn't really changed the meaning for me.
Okay. I because like it's always funny too. Like I was with one interview, I've always said that like songs are almost kind of like the closest thing to a time machine that we will get because that puts you back in that sort of moment.
I love that. That's so true. And I mean, it's true not just for Upon Wings music, but when I hear other music, there are certain bands that will just like take me back to a time. And I don't think I can ever hear that band or that song without like being taken in a time machine back to that moment, you know?
Are you a situational listener too? Do you like listen to certain songs or certain bands when you're at certain places or when the weather's a certain way or something like that?
No, no, it's weird. I'm not like that at all. Like I'll listen to, it's kind of like ice cream. I'll eat it in the winter, you know?
That's a
I'll
great
listen to
quote. That's a great quote. So simple, but such a great quote.
I mean, I'll listen to any music anytime. I don't really put it on, in a certain situation. But that's a cool idea actually.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Just like ice cream, it's quite a cool idea. Yeah. But yeah, I've always just thought that like people's lives, we have photo albums, but I've always thought that people's lives could also be told by playlists in the future.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
Yeah. But for the artists, I think the music that they write is the playlist that's gonna be their photo album.
Yes, no, that's true. I definitely feel like I've never been someone to journal. Like I don't write a journal or anything, but sometimes I look back through my music and it's kind of like a journal.
100%. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for a part two, and I'm looking forward to a part three in the future. Is there just anything else with Upon Wings that you would like to promote for the release of the Last Love EP?
Well, thank you. I can't wait to do it again. And thanks again for having me on. I really like your show. And I guess I would just, yeah, say to people can find us online at uponwings.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Upon Wings, and YouTube is Upon Wings Official. So find us on Spotify and all the Apple Music and stuff and follow us. The best way that you can support bands trying to, get out there is really by following them on social media and streaming their music and downloading, buying their music too. But even if you can't buy it, just, supporting us on socials is really helpful.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And of Upon Wings, the Last Love EP, Be sure to pick that up. We will see you next time on Heavy New York.